Professor Graham Marson, Director of the Belfast Center, thank you for your kind remarks. Distinguished faculty and students, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And thank you for the kind introduction. It is a pleasure to be back once again at the Kennedy School. Last year, I spoke about the key ingredients of Rwanda's development performance, in particular, the importance of meaningful and continuous involvement of citizens. We had no choice but to focus on the real problems in our context and use the resources at our disposal to find solutions that work well for us through trial and error sometimes. In many ways, our experience mirrors the perspective on development success being modeled here at the Center for International Development. Building on that, I would like to share, among others, some of the thinking behind the recent push by the African Union heads of state to make the organization more focused, effective, and financially sustainable. Because of Africa's history of fragmentation and external orientation, it has often been easier to make or to trade with countries outside the continent than with each other, limiting the complexity of our markets and farms. This is one of the major reasons for the paradox that Africa has remained poor despite its vast wealth. Therefore, the right mechanisms must be found to aggregate the trajectories of individual countries together in a collective action. Yet, the African Union has been mired in a crisis of implementation virtually since its inception, and its programs are more than 97% funded by external donors. Having been entrusted by the Assembly of Heads of State with heading the institutional reform of the African Union, a blueprint was presented at the most recent summit and subsequently adopted. Among the highlights are focusing on fewer key continental priorities and leaving the rest to the regional economic communities, rationalizing the various agencies, competitively recruiting the commissioners and following through on the decision to finance the union through a levy on eligible imports. We will be working closely with the incoming chairperson of the Commission, as well as the current and previous chairpersons of the Union, President Alpha Conde of Guinea, President of Chad, Idris Deby, to ensure that the momentum is not lost. The African Union has many weaknesses, but total cynicism is also incorrect. Many problems would be worse, much worse, without the role played by African institutions in places such as Somalia, the Central African Republic, or Gambia. It is also worth noting that with the readmission of Morocco at the last summit, the African Union now includes every country on the continent for the first time in history. This is one sign, amongst others, that there is a greater scope for finding common ground on contentious issues, offering hope that major ambitions such as the Continental Free Trade Area has become and can become a reality. Our world is changing rapidly and profoundly, though the direction and the destination are still unclear. This context of global uncertainty is also among the factors pushing us in Africa to look after our own business and interests. After all, Africa's destiny is clearly linked to events elsewhere. As I alluded last year, discussing our own context, it can be rather unsettling, even in the most advanced democracies, when the preferences and viewpoints of elites and experts are forced to accommodate other perspectives in the population at large. And indeed, we have been seeing this play out in recent months. The arrival of a new administration here in the United States always brings a period of recalibration. From where we stand, however, there is no cause for alarm. And indeed, some of the changes on the horizon might, in some way, prove beneficial. First, beyond some very notable initiatives, such as the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or PEPFAR, the policy of the United States, including Power Africa in the last administration, the policy of the United States in Africa has lacked strategic coherence for some time. Second, even if the new equilibrium is that Africa is increasingly left to its own devices, this is not such a bad thing. At a minimum, the shift should incite us on the continent to take the lead in defining Africa's common interests and positions, rather than waiting for it to be done on our behalf. But there is also a larger dynamic, which may be more apparent from the outside, particularly from the vantage point of small countries. For one, there is a wide gap between perception and reality, and more generally between what citizens value and want and what elites and experts believe is good for them, leading to a sense of humiliation and alienation from public institutions among some stakeholders. What is now taking place within some developed countries is actually not so different from how those of us in places considered marginal have been treated for a long time. There is a sense of unease and insecurity at the growing realization that so-called fake news has the power to drive politics and decision-making at the highest levels. But there is no doubt that much of what is assumed to be true about places far from the mainstream is either outright wrong or highly distorted because it has been ripped from its context. This has been our reality in Rwanda, Africa, and beyond, day in and day out, for as long as we can remember. And yet, we have managed to deal with it and keep moving forward by refusing to be defined by such prejudices. One useful side effect of negative stereotypes is that it increases the value of surprise. When people discover a different reality from what they have been led to expect. For students, no less than for their professors, there is no better research method than coming to see for yourselves how others choose to live their lives. The most productive outcome of this period of global malaise would be relationships healed of the instinct to dominate others and instruct them. It has also been Africa's moment, provided we are ready and willing to seize it. Commodity cycles will come and go, and anyway, commodities markets are not the only ones that are subject to sudden fluctuations. If African economies are more diversified, namely with a greater share of industry and services, then they will also be more resilient, strengthening the capacity of African countries to cooperate in the pursuit of mutual interests and goals is a big step toward that. In any case, despite our challenges, economic growth in Africa is comparatively strong. Moreover, we have the favorable demographics needed to sustain these positive trends for several decades to come. Our place in the global order is small, but it is capable of growing so long as we take responsibility for our future, both individually and collectively. I'm very much looking forward to our discussion, and I thank you for your kind attention.